Ladies and gentlemen, welcome back to the Trondheim National Park, to the very peak of our mountain zoo, for a very special build for the critically endangered Himalayan brown bears. You indeed heard me correctly, our first critically endangered species of the series in 2 zoos. This is what all those hard yards were for. All the low coverage, low appeal animals, all the irritating guest facilities, and of course, all of the rocks. It all leads up to save an endangered species from the brink, protecting the world from losing these beautiful animals forever. Now, I've said the only time I would need to have a larger breeding program is when we have these rarer species. But I think you'll agree, based on what we're about to put together here, it would be excessive to have multiple habitats. Just, bear that in mind because I'm not going to show all of the work. I usually give the gist and then jump ahead of it. And it's already shaping up to be a long one. As I'm now trying to grow the channel a bit, this is where I'm going to remind you, if you do enjoy the video, please give it a like. And there's much more like this on the way, so subscribe to stay in the loop for upcoming videos. That's the admin done, now let's get back to the build. Okay, so the first challenge with any species is acquisition. Himalayan brown bears are not a common zoo animal, as you might expect given their endangered status. In fact, there are suspected to be less than 1,000 individuals still surviving in the wild, so any attempt to keep and maintain them comes under heavy scrutiny. And rightly so. Now, normally for us here in Trondheim, and the Highlands too, we would get animals either by approaching contacts and making deals, or by people coming to us and surrendering them. Today's kind of a bit of both. We were approached about a wounded female bear that's still young enough to have cubs anyway, but that couldn't survive on her own due to the nature of her injuries. Probably as a result of competition from shrinking territories. We weren't offered her straight away, but we were asked to be assessed due to our altitude and location. So, of course we agreed. They were looking around actually at the proposed site while we were building the Palace's cat habitat on the other side of the zoo last week. Anyway, long story short, we're approved due to our optimal conditions. We're getting a bear. But wait, there's more. A facility in India is going to loan us a big old male to try and get a head start on our breeding program. So all the pieces are in place for us to do something remarkable. Bears just in general are my favourite type of animal. There was a point where the branding for this channel was all bear related, so this is something I really want to put a stamp on. The enclosure is big as the moose if not bigger, because I had to have a mountain in it. And praise be to the bear gods, there are no foliage limitations, so I can go absolutely bananas. Now, before we really get into the meat of this build, and trust me, it's meaty, I'll warn you. This kind of over-the-top rock use is not healthy, and I do not encourage anyone to do it, and very much doubt that it is necessary, but I am too stupid to work out a simpler way. I have faith in you, that you can figure out something better. Right, I'm not going to be able to line any of this up with the video, so I'll just talk through things in the order that I think of them. We'll start with the landscape itself. Well, it's a mountain, like I said. I want these bears to feel as natural as possible, so I've planned for a cave shelter, similar to the snow leopards, and as much as possible natural barriers. I know that's nothing new in this zoo, but for the best chance of breeding these bears, we almost want it to be a private viewing only. Limited access to the bear pit. Only at certain hours, and only when accompanied by a tour guide. Until we have cubs at least. I don't know what kinks or preferences these animals have, so until we have it all figured out, it's restricted access. The window that I have put in is heavy duty. I don't anticipate the bears wreaking havoc and trying to escape, but that's a big teddy. It wouldn't take much effort for it to crack open your average fence and revenant a guest, so a couple of extra inches can't hurt. Pause. I wanted to set up this enclosure with a few layers, similar to the snow leopards, but not quite as extreme. The habitat itself is almost a bowl, which makes adding these natural barriers nice and simple. But that also means that there's a justification for the water source. Pools of crystal water at the top of the mountain where all the rain gathers, and the snow when it melts. Bears are surprisingly good swimmers. I say surprisingly because, well, you go try and swim wearing a thick fur onesie and see how well you do. Don't actually. Alright. I'm not having that on my conscience. It's harder to swim with clothes on, let alone a bear's winter fat stores and then a fur coat on top of that, in freezing water as well. You might as well be wearing lead shoes. The bears love a good swim, that's the point I'm trying to make anyway. Now you're going to see me go back and forth quite a bit between rocks, foliage and enrichment here. And not always in a way that makes sense, but you see, the entire time I'm doing the habitat, I'm also building bits of the other side of the mountain with rocks, having to take breaks and then go back to do a bit more. I'm not joking when I say there are over 5,000 rocks used in this mountain alone, which is why I'm only showing some of it. I will say though, my PC is coping okay at the moment. It's still not lagging at this point. I think if this zoo went to episode 20 though, we'd be in trouble. Ooh, there you go. A little bit of an insider knowledge there. There will be somewhere between 11 and 20 episodes at Trondheim. It's not worth much. In fact, it's not worth anything. But now you know something no one else does. Seeing as how we're on top of the mountain, out of the way of anything useful like work zones for keepers, it was necessary to build a little keeper area to make sure that the bears were well kept at all times. They get their very own little staff team who are paid the same as all the other staff despite doing only a quarter of the work. I made all of the structures out of stone. Not my rocks, you know, the stone building pieces. I thought it would make sense to use the materials that are readily available. And let's be honest, if there's one thing we're not short of, well, I'm sure you see where I'm going with this. Something I am happy about, following on from a couple of enclosures where enrichment has been an afterthought, and I ended up interfering with my designs, I actually thought to add the enrichment items before I did too much in the way of, you know, plants and the other thing. I know, forward thinking, right? Somewhat undercut by the fact that I put a load of trees down right where I needed to place a significant amount of rocks, but it's okay. Never one to be beaten, I just lift all the trees straight up into the air, where they can wait in limbo until I'm ready for them. That's how they do it in real life, right? Plant purgatory? No? Whatever. For every problem there is a solution, and usually an idiot doing the wrong thing regardless. Okay, let's take a brief step back from the build. Partly because I don't know where this will all line up and I don't want to get ahead of myself too much, but also because I want to talk about something completely irrelevant. Recently, let's say the last couple of weeks, I've been looking for other Planet Zoo creators around my sort of size. Give or take a few. Some much larger as well, you know. I basically wanted to see what other people are doing. The big channels are the big channels. We all know them. We love them. But they're just the tip of the iceberg. There are so many new or mid-sized gamers who have just so much talent and artistry that you can't help but feel inspired. I've got new ideas for habitats and buildings and boathouses and hexagons and summer camps. Things I never even considered putting into a zoo until now. I now see all the possibilities stacking up. I've got a little binder of ideas that are purely community driven, so if I use any of them I will give a shout out to where it came from, but there's so much talent that needs more attention. It'd be so cool to see people get recognition they deserve. And it's not just the gaming aspect. I'm not a great orator by any means. I am self-conscious and without too much personality. But some of these smaller creators are genuinely entertaining to listen to. I don't know where I'm going with this. I guess I'm saying if you're watching me, have a look around. I think you'll be surprised at the quality. I'll also say, coming back to the big channels, obviously they're great builders and entertainers, no doubt, that's why they are where they are. But I get the impression that we're all anticipating Planet Zoo 2 now. Maybe those who have been around the block a few times are looking forward to a fresh sandbox to play in. I know if I'd been doing this for, 7 years now? Something like that? 6, 7 years? I wish I hadn't said that. Jesus. Since the game came out. That's really ruined my day, that is. Stupid memes. I know if I'd been doing it that long, I would be running low on drive right about now. Feeling that creative fatigue. Hell, even now I lack imagination from time to time. This is the best time to check out new creators, and the best time for the new Planet Zoo builders. I expect this to be the last year before Planet Zoo 2 is released, so there's still plenty of opportunities to be seized. If you have any favourites, small or mid-sized Planet Zoo channels, drop them in the comments for me to check out. I've subscribed to a few already, and I've got some weekly series to follow, but I can always add more for those neuron activations, get those signals pinging around. Anyway, enough rambling. What's going on here? My initial thought for the foliage was what I mentioned in a previous video actually. If there are no coverage limitations, start big and work your way down. So I placed some trees. Not too many because I still want the bears to be visible. Enough that it starts to look busy. I then chose an area to focus on and basically peppered the area with bushes, grasses and flowers to see what sort of access the animals would have. Turns out, not a lot. The dense patch that I created was so dense that it couldn't be traversed, which is not ideal, as you can probably appreciate. I think at that point I decided to stick to what I know and started building out the mouth of the cave. I've seen a lot of creators use these fake rock pieces to make walls that can then be copied about. It's a nice straightforward way of creating a realistic rock effect without overdoing it and crashing your PC with too many individual pieces. So, of course, I didn't do that. I've let my style develop on its own, which I guess will help me stand out, but also be slower and much less efficient. So, positives and negatives. I like to start with the largest rocks and get a good idea of the shape I want to create. Try to make any of the flat surfaces like sheer cliff faces and then figure out the textured areas afterwards. I then use a rock piece with a slope. There are a couple of good options in the normal set. These take some of the corners and the angles out of the area so it looks less like a stack of rocks and more like a large continuous formation. Then I go through with some of the smaller rocks and fill in any gaps or weird shapes and try to create some different textures. Then, using one of the large flat ones, I sink them down and create more flat areas between the rocks and really fill in the holes. And then finally, I use the aquatic fake rocks, the little clusters, to add a bit of loose shale onto the flat areas. So it's all very doable, but it's a 5-pass strategy that can take a decent amount of time. I think my next do will be somewhere flat. I think I had it right with the Highland Reserve. I love this zoo. It looks amazing. I'm very happy with it. But, whoa, so much work into just scenery. It's a nightmare. I never planned to do all this with the mountain. I had it bare all the way back in episode 2, the Lynx cage build. I was happy with the rock paint across the back, so I don't know how we reached this. It's definitely better, but it's a big jump. I'm pretty sure if we go around and look at the older enclosures, and we will at some point because we'll have to tour the zoo when we end it, I'm sure we'll be able to see the progression of the stone. I was looking at the snow leopard habitat recently and thinking, this looks so much less detailed than I remember. At the time it was so cool to me, but now it needs a bit of TLC. I did give it a bit of an upgrade, nothing drastic, but something to make sure it still fits in with the surroundings, as it is quite central and easy to spot. I also worked on the Moose Mountain as I showed in the last episode, so I think it would be quite surprising to go back and view it all once we're all wrapped up. I mentioned about that small patch of foliage. By the way, I say foliage, but having watched a few new people, some people say foliage, and it's made me question everything. Is that a regional difference? Maybe that's a US-UK thing. Comment how you say it, so I can get a consensus. Anyway, that little patch was just a test to see how I wanted to do the whole area. I've always said that it's not my strongest thing, so I don't really have an eye for it. So I wanted to give myself something to visualise and then sit with to see if inspiration would strike. It didn't. I ended up winging it as usual. But I found that it can work just as well to just throw things about. Obviously there are areas where the bears travel a lot and bits where the stone meets the soil, so they're a bit more sparse for the plants. But when you really think about it, stuff grows everywhere. It wouldn't be nicely curated and tidy in the wild, so I'm not going to worry about it too much from now on. I've also seen both ends of the spectrum in builds, some where it's very minimalist and considered, and others where it's almost overwhelming, and they both can look incredible. For different reasons, obviously. But good is good, Now, there are these big flower patches with greenery around it that can be used as the sort of carpet layer for these bears, but no simple grasses. So I ended up using some of the small ferns and spamming, and yes, I mean spamming, the areas that I wanted with these things. All sunk into the ground as well, which takes longer when it's aligned to the hilly habitat. While flowers are great and add a splash of colour, it can be a little bit excessive. And when we already have the crown for being excessive with the rocks, it made sense to maybe tone it down a bit. Okay, well, I would love to stay and chat, but I don't know what there is else to talk about, to be honest. I'll end on this. As of recording, we have now successfully bred Himalayan brown bears. The 2 cubs will go on to be released into the wild, or into reservations to help keep the species alive. Bear in mind, this is all in a digital world, so take that with a grain of salt. And we are now looking at getting another female, as soon as one's available that is, to expand our breeding program. I know, I said we would only probably have one because of the size and effort that the enclosure required. I actually think I said it makes sense, but that is not a limiting factor for me. And I don't think I will show the construction of that one. It feels like a waste to have another video just for the same thing, so I might include little clips in an upcoming video, maybe a shorter one, so be on the lookout for that. All that's left to say is thank you so much for watching. Make sure to leave a like for this big massive mountain and all these many rocks, and subscribe to see more. We're aiming for 100 subscribers this year, which seems achievable, I think. I hope you have a fantastic week, best week of all time, put all other weeks to shame, and I will see you in the next one.